Good morning. My name is Jean Wisdom, and I'm a safety consultant with UA Safe State located here on the University of Alabama campus. We provide a free service to the entire state of Alabama. Today we're going to discuss the OSHA minor servicing exception under the Lockout Tagout procedure and hopefully answer some questions about how it may apply to your specific operation. The standard covers the servicing and maintenance of machines and equipment in which the unexpected energization or startup of the machine or equipment or release of stored energy could harm employees. That's the whole focus of the Lockout Tagout standard, and this particular caveat, as we discuss it, is to protect the employees from the inadvertent startup of a piece of equipment. This standard establishes the minimum performance requirements for the control of hazardous energy. You can go back and find it in 1910-147, and that's the definition of what we're talking about with the Lockout Tagout servicing agreement. Application of Lockout Tagout. Where does it apply? When does it apply at your facility? Lockout Tagout applies to the control of energy during servicing and/or maintenancing of machines or equipment. The normal production operations are not covered. So if it's a normal production operation and you are taking a piece of equipment down to do maintenance and repair, it does not fall under this exception. It falls under the Lockout Tagout standard. Servicing and/or maintenance which takes place during normal production operations is covered by this exception if an employee is required to remove or bypass a guard or other safety device, and if an employee is required to place any part of their body into an area on a machine or piece of equipment where work is actually being performed, better known as the POO or the point of operation, or where an associated danger zone exists during machine operating cycle. There's some key definitions that you need to understand. The first is, what is normal production operations? Normal production operations are the utilization of a machine or equipment to perform its intended use, i.e. produce XYZ parts for a particular shift, a day, or a piece of equipment. Servicing and/or maintenance. It's workplace activities such as constructing, installing, setting up, adjusting, inspecting, modifying, maintaining, and/or servicing a piece of equipment or machinery. The activities that include lubrication, cleaning, unjamming of machines, equipment, and making adjustments or tool changes where the employee may be exposed to an unexpected energization or startup of the equipment or release of hazardous energy. All of those things either fall under Lockout Tagout or the minor servicing exception. Normal production versus Lockout Tagout. How do I know what is normal production and what is Lockout Tagout? The application of 1910-147 versus Subpart O. 1910-147, as we have said, is the Lockout Tagout standard. Subpart O is machine guarding. If you look at the exception for minor servicing and maintenance, if you aren't locking it out, then you have to be in compliance with Subpart O or machine guarding. And they directly relate to the types of work being done and not the means of abatement. Okay? What are you doing, not what am I trying to get done and get around. Cannot rely on an employee's actions to protect themselves. We're human beings. We make mistakes. We get caught up in things. So you cannot rely purely on the actions of an employee to protect them in the event of a Lockout Tagout or machine guarding issue. Machine or equipment inspection may constitute either servicing and/or maintenance, or it could be a normal production operation. It depends on the specific circumstances of the work task. Purpose or function of the activity determines which standard applies. Some examples are inspecting a machine equals servicing and maintenance. I'm looking at it, I'm inspecting it. Is it running properly? Do I need to make any adjustments? Inspecting product equals machine guarding. If I have to get inside a machine to inspect product, I am not inspecting a machine, I'm inspecting a product, and it normally requires me to bypass a guard or enter into a machine where I can get hurt. Exceptions to the lockout tagout paragraph. That exception that everybody wants to use, and if it's pertinent and applicable, it is a good tool. But you have to understand that minor tool changes and adjustments and/or minor servicing activities which take place during normal production operations are not covered by this standard if they are routine, repetitive, and integral to the use of the equipment for production, provided the work is performed using alternative measures which provide effective protection. Again, we go back to subpart O. If I'm not doing lockout tagout, then I have to have sufficient machine guarding. They go hand in hand. Alternative measures are the key to meeting the exception. What are those alternative measures? They must clearly define what is routine, repetitive, and integral to each process. And we'll discuss those and what OSHA means by routine, repetitive, and integral. Convenience is not a factor. It's not that the task is only going to take 2 minutes and it takes me longer to lock it out. It's a matter of, does it meet the criteria of the minor servicing exception? Routine. Routine means the activity must be a regular course of procedure and be in accordance with the established practices. Routine means it happens every shift, every day, could be every hour, could be every 15 minutes. But it's routine. It's something that happens and we do all the time. Repetitive. The activity must be repeated as part of the production cycle or process. Repetitive doesn't mean once a day. Repetitive could mean every so many minutes, every so many hours, every so many shifts. You have to establish that it is repetitive, and how did you define and justify repetitive? Integral. The activity must be inherent to the production process. Okay? Must use alternative measures which provide effective protection, such as interlocked gates, barrier guards, mechanical blocks, pins, bars, locking devices, or remote devices to control the employee's exposure to an inherent startup or operation of the machine. So when you talk about minor servicing and you're exploring the option of can we use this, then you have to make sure that you define and meet the criteria of routine, repetitive, and integral to your process. The OSHA preamble clarifies this, that they identified some accidents which could occur while employees are lubricating, cleaning, unjamming, or adjusting machines or equipment. Okay? They're putting their hands into a piece of equipment that is supposed to be running and processing whatever product you're making, and when you stick your hand in there or come in contact with that equipment, you can have an injury. These activities were determined to be different from other activities which are routinely conducted during normal operations, under the exception because they are usually done only on an as-needed basis. Setup, another question. I have to set up the machine, okay? If I have to lock it out, then how am I going to set it up? I have to move things, rearrange things. I need to be able to use the exception. The problem is setup is defined as task to prepare a machine to perform its normal production operations. These activities cannot take place during normal production because you're setting the machine up to run. So it must be a lockout tagout and not a minor servicing exception. Some examples to help you understand. You have a plastic blow molding machine making pop bottles. There's interlocked gates, and it's being used as protection. Subpart O, machine guarding, as an exception to lockout tagout. Several times during the shift, bottles fall over on the feed line. So the operator has to get those bottles out in order to keep production running. So what the operator does is he raises the gate and removes the bottles that have fallen over. Subpart O, interlocked gate, raised gate, machine stops, operator reaches in and removes the bottle. This takes place during production. It appears to be routine and repetitive and integral to the use of the equipment for production, And the alternative protection is the interlocking gate. Example 2, automatic injection molding machine. About once an hour, a plastic part sticks to the mold. The operator opens the gate and pulls the part off by hand and drops it into a box. Essential to the production line, essential to keep it running, an interlocked gate that is raised and allows the operator to remove the part. This takes place during production, appears to be routine and repetitive, and integral to the use of the equipment for production. And the alternative protection is the interlocked gate, which is an accepted means of effective machine guarding. It meets the criteria, just like example 1, for minor servicing exception. Example 3. You have an automatic injection molding machine. The mold opens too soon and the plastic part melts to the mold and doesn't fall off. Question: is it minor servicing and maintenance, or is it lockout tagout? Well, now someone has to go between the mold with hand tools and pry the scrape off the material. This doesn't appear to be routine, it doesn't appear to be repetitive, and it doesn't appear to be integral to the process. This is only done on an as-needed basis. Thus, it must be lockout tagout to protect the employee from an unexpected failure. The keys to success in lockout tagout, Subpart O, and the minor servicing agreement. You need to know and understand the issues before applying each one of those procedures. You have to define why a task is part of normal operation and why. If you do job hazard analyses, if you do JSAs, job safety analysis, you need to understand what part of the task is normal operation and why, and what are the exceptions to the normal task. You need to define how the machine can unexpectedly start up. If you use a what-if process, what if this is opened? What if this is closed? What if this moves? What if this happens? Comes back to your JHAs and your JSAs. Have you clearly defined how the machine can be energized? Understand how current guarding and safety circuits work. It's not okay just to say we have guarding. Do you understand? Are there delays in some of your circuitry? Does the interlocked gates work? Are you testing them? Are you assuring that they're functional? And you have to assess if guarding meets the proper levels per the risk analysis. Okay? Not all guarding is good for all scenarios. Not all circuitry is good for all scenarios. Does your guarding meet the level of the risk analysis? And then you have to define the company interpretation of minor servicing and justification. OSHA leaves some leeway as you have to define what is minor servicing and you have to justify it. Can you get the integral? Can you get the repetitive? Can you meet the criteria in the definition of the minor servicing definition? The keys to success is you have to do task-based assessments. You have to get the operators involved. You have to get the maintenance people involved. You have to get engineers involved to understand when you're assessing a specific task as it relates to lockout, tagout, machine guarding, or minor servicing is, do we know what everybody's doing when they get involved in this process? You have to identify all the sources of energy: mechanical, hydraulic, pneumatic, electrical, mechanical, springs, and everything else when you talk to that group of people that are involved that can be identified as sources of energy for that particular piece of equipment. Identify trapped pressures and how they are relieved through guarding and lockout tagout. Is it a hydraulic cylinder? Is it an air cylinder? Do the drain valves work? How do you drain those? So you don't have the inadvertent failure or release of pressure or energy that allows someone to get hurt. Authorized and affected employees. Have you clearly defined who's authorized and who's affected? The standard clearly states that if you're authorized, you have been trained in the hazards and the specific operation of that piece of equipment. You are authorized to work on it. You are authorized to perform maintenance on it. If you are affected an employee, then you are to leave the area when lockout, tagout, or minor servicing activities are taking place. You are affected by the tasks that are taking place. You are not authorized to work on them, all right? So make sure you've clearly defined who your affected employees are, who your authorized employees are, and trained accordingly. Proper lockout, tagout hardware and procedures. Make sure you have the equipment to lock out a piece of equipment. Make sure that you have the equipment-specific lockout, tagout procedures that are required under 1910-147. You have to have a step-by-step for specific equipment, and it has to be written down and accessible to the employees. You have to have the proper hardware and circuitry for machine guarding. If I'm using interlocked gates, do I have everything properly installed? Do I routinely check it and adjust it so that as things may move? Light curtains, are they properly adjusted and checked? Things move and shift during the course of a process or operation. Mechanical guards, interlocks, mats, light curtains, dump valves, triggering devices to shut off equipment, etc. All of the different things that you have to look at that are a part of the circuitry and machine guarding on a specific operation. And then you have to identify every task that is associated with that machine. It's not one big look at it in a large scope. You have to look at the specific tasks. Operators, maintenance, engineering, setup. Each one of those people, what do they do? What do their tasks entail? And do we have them covered? Make a determination if it fails under lockout, tagout, or machine guarding, or falls under lockout, tagout, or machine guarding. You have to make that determination. The standard gives you, as the owner of that piece of equipment, is if you justify it to fall under the minor servicing agreement, then you have all your documentations. If it doesn't, then it's lockout, tagout, but make sure you have your method of reaching your end decision. Some task-based assessments. Some tasks are clear where other tasks are not so clear. Some clear lockout, tagout tasks. Replacing a transmission change, changing a pneumatic cylinder, preventive maintenance with lubrication of chain and sprocket, removal of fixed guard to access mechanical apparatuses, changing saw blades, replacing a motor starter. Clearly lockout, tagout. The equipment has to have a specific form, step by step, be secured and locked out before work is performed. Some clear machine guarding issues. Adding raw components to a hopper. Okay, there's usually a machine guard, allows product to be dumped in, but you're protected between that hopper and by a guard of some form or fashion. Removing finished product from a press. Refilling a label roller and adding ink to an enclosed printer station. Clearly protected by machine guarding, keeping the employee back and preventing injury or incident. Some that are gray and you have to make a determination on is clearing a product jam. Okay, you have to go back to your definition of minor servicing. Is it routine, repetitive, and integral, or is it lockout, tagout? Line changeovers, adjusting end stops, die set changes, tensioning of a transmission belt, or machine index adjustment. Take a look at those, use them as examples, and compare them to the situations that you may be considering under the minor servicing agreement or lockout, tagout. Why are there issues, accidents, and incorrect implementation of either strategy? Because there's missing procedures. It's also the reason why OSHA requires specific written procedures for lockout, tagout. There's insufficient training. We don't train our affected employees of what their role and responsibility is. We don't make sure that the authorized employees clearly understand the expectations, how the machine operates, and how to safely perform lockout, tagout, or minor servicing. There's improper guarding. We have what we think is a guard, and it's not a proper guard, or it's not an effective guard. We have a lack of sufficient safety circuitry, okay? When you look at the electronic devices, when you look at the photo eyes, when you look at the light curtains, are they sufficient for what operation you have? Assigning tasks to machine guarding for convenience, not justification, comes back to, does it meet the criteria? All right? Machine guarding is not a convenience. It does not protect employees when they have to reach inside a piece of equipment that can inadvertently start up and cause injury. And we have missing documentation to support the use of machine guarding and minor servicing under the OSHA definition. Again, if you're going to use the exception to the rule, then you need to make sure you have the proper documentation. If you have lockout tagout, you have to make sure that you have proper documentation of how to secure a piece of equipment before the employee places any part of their body into that machine. How to move forward. For lockout tagout, you need to make sure you have the proper hardware. Do you have the gate valves? Do you have the locks? Do you have the tags? Do you have all the different disconnecting means for breakers or for electrical disconnects that are required to safely lock out this piece of equipment? Do you have the specific procedures? Do you have safe removal of stored energy? Do you have that? Make sure that the employees try before they ever begin work on a piece of equipment. You have to go through all the steps, but then the final step is always hitting that start button without hitting the stop button and making sure that that piece of equipment does not start up. Training and audits. You have to audit your lockout tagout procedures to make sure that they're correct, that something hasn't changed. There hasn't been a T made into a line that wasn't there when it was originally written, that you need to add an additional step or something has changed. On machine guarding, you need to make sure that you have the machine risk analysis done. You have to identify the safety functions that are tied to machine guarding. You have to ensure that the machine is in a safe condition upon actuation. You have to ensure safety circuitry is designed to the appropriate level, and you have to check for unexpected startups. And then there's documentation with both of these processes. You have to have the task-based assessments, those JHAs, JSAs, fault tree analysis, whatever you call them, to look at and risk assessments by your facility. Supporting documentation with procedures, schematics, and testing. Routine audits and documentation of those audits. And any items that are identified, that you have the documentation of those items being followed up on and corrected. So it comes down to there is an exception. There's that caveat out there that makes life a little bit easier, but you have to make sure that you have the documentation. You have to make sure that you've done your work on the front side. But the same thing holds with the lockout tagout. Employees are sticking parts of their bodies into pieces of equipment that are meant to operate. Lockout tagout procedures and training have to be detailed and documented so that the employee can safely go through those steps and perform the tasks that they're expected to do. And machine guarding is great. It's designed to protect employees, but it has to be functional. It has to be the appropriate guarding. So all three options work together to have a program. And the old saying is, when in doubt, lock it out. If you're not sure if you have appropriate guarding, if you're not sure it meets the minor servicing and maintenance agreement, then the best and safest way is to lock it out and remove the energy source. Thank you for the opportunity of having this presentation with you, sharing information on OSHA's lockout, tagout, machine guarding, and minor servicing. Again, this is only one small paragraph in an awfully large standard called lockout, tagout. But if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to contact me. My information again, Jean Wisdom with Alabama Safe State. We also have a website at www.alabamasafestate.ua.edu, and look forward to working or answering any questions you may have regarding this or any other safety topic. Thank you.